Who's looking for a sexy date? STC.com is the premier ethically non-monogamous dating site that also houses a wealth of information regarding sexuality and sexual health. Join the Please Me Health Collective on STC.com and listen to Eve's free live webinars. Use code 37340 for a free trial membership. Maybe you are in the market for some sexy toys to add some spice to the bedroom. Check out the Organic Lovin' link for the best online store for sex toys, lubes, and more. This podcast is intended for mature audiences.
Ageism is just a real big factor in life. And in all different kinds of, on all different levels, it hits me in the face in the most unexpected moments sometimes.
Eve is a licensed sexual health physical therapist on a mission to destigmatize conversations about sex. Please sit back and surrender to the pleasure of Please Me. Hello, and welcome to Please Me, the podcast that aims to destigmatize conversations about sex and sexual health by turning the sheets into our classroom. I'm here to introduce an amazing guest named Karen Anne Coccioli, and she is a self-proclaimed lifelong learner. She believes that age is just a number, which I also do, and she identifies as an androgynous gay woman. And she is a published author who holds a PhD in comparative literature, gender studies, sexuality, and madness. And I want to welcome you to the show today. Welcome to Please Me, Karen. How are you today?
Thank you. I am so excited to be on, Eve. I really am. I just love your show and what you're offering to people to please themselves and to leave the most amazing life that they can. And sexuality is a big component of that.
Absolutely. I am a big pleasure advocate. And so that's part of what this show is all about, is really allowing people to express themselves fully in that way and to teach people how to communicate in that way as well, because a lot of people just don't know what to say, how to move forward with having these conversations with their partners.
Right, exactly. And like in my case, not having a partner, but still being able to pleasure myself, to be able to find people to be around me that are also on the same wavelength with this, because it's not always the case. And as we talked about, I'm 74 years old, but I'm still so active, sexually active in the lifestyle. And as you mentioned, a lifelong learner. So, and I think the writing helps that, because being able to write stories about people, I'm constantly exploring them and exploring their identities and their sexuality. And it's just it's a fun way to live.
Absolutely. I agree. And you're a part of the kink community, and we're going to get into that in a little bit. But I would love to just go back a little bit in time, just so that people can understand sort of your background. And I would love to delve into your experience with marriage, divorce, and how you were able to break free from the societal norms that told you that for a woman, marriage was the only correct option.
So, yeah, it's a long story. I'm going to try to make it kind of brief, but I grew up in an Italian household, very conservative. Unfortunately, my childhood was I was sexually abused from my father, so it was a really hard, traumatic childhood for me. And actually, writing was literally what saved me. So, what happens, or to me, when you have that kind of trauma and you're sexually abused and molested for certain years of your childhood, it hardwires your brain in a way to say that if you go out of the norm, if you step out of the box that you were put in, you're going to get punished severely. So that led me to marrying twice and abusive men, and having children. And I love my sons and my grandsons. But would my life perhaps had been different? Yeah, I probably would have. So for me, the journey to come out was so long, so arduous, so tumultuous, because I knew I was at least a lesbian when I was I had a crush on a Rosemary Mateo in 7th grade. So I did, but so it was a very, very, very difficult, especially because when you, or I shouldn't say when I came from that kind of trauma, I just found it so difficult to break through. I did not get divorced until I was almost 60. And so although I dipped into, I was a single woman also throughout some of that time in between. And I just started, exploring who I was. But to be very honest, I wasn't really who I was meant to be until only 15 years ago, where I lived it actively and lived it truthfully and authentically.
And I love that story because, it is never too late to explore your authenticity, whether you're, 25 or 85, and it's so important to really look within and see how you can make your life better, how you can make yourself happy if you're not. And if you know these things about yourself and those things are internal and you're not able to express them, you're really, giving yourself, you're putting yourself at a disservice, right? So I appreciate you sharing that story and being so honest about it. I know that I too was abused as a child. By the age of 10, I had been abused by 5 people in my family. And, that really set me up for a whole lifetime of trying to heal from that. And it took a very long time. And I just always remember that my grandmother, every time I would visit her, and I love her to death, and she passed away a couple of years ago, but every time I would see her, and I didn't get married until I was 36. Mm-hmm. So for that, for my culture, I'm a Caribbean, Puerto Rican, American, and that is really, really late.
It's like
that is really late. And so, every time I would see her, the first question she would ask me was, "When are you getting married?" And to her, that was like the epitome of success for a woman, and it didn't matter that I had a career and that I was living on my own and supporting myself and like doing all of these amazing things and living an amazing life. For her, marriage was the only choice, and that really was the societal pressure on women. And still really is in a lot of ways, unfortunately.
I'm so impressed that you actually, considering that you also had trauma as a child, that you're actually like created a life for yourself. See that, and that's where sometimes I feel, I don't know, I seriously, I think I've lost years in between, but I'm really impressed by that. I really am. That you're a wonderful role model for people who have been through that, because unfortunately it took me a lot more years longer to get through it. I finally did and gave myself permission to really explore who I was and then able to live that way. But kudos to you that you're able to do it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And, for all of us that have experienced trauma, mm-hmm. It is really a journey of healing, and it's multi-layered. And, you heal the first layer of the onion, and then there's another layer to heal, and then there's another layer to heal. And it's interesting because, doing this podcast has been another layer of healing for me that I wasn't even anticipating when I started it. So I'm really grateful for that, for sure. And for meeting women like you and all of the other amazing guests that I've had that have really helped me to heal in so many other different ways that I wasn't even anticipating. It's been a wonderful journey. I would love to know about the 2 pen names that you write under and why you chose to write under pen names, and tell us about the genres of books that you write about.
All right, so I actually write under my real name, Karen Anne Coccioli, and actually my book, Paradise, is a hybrid memoir, and it tells a story of my everything from the trauma to triumph, I call it, right? So it goes through the, how a lot portions of how I healed and where I got to be where I am today. So I am very, very proud of that book. But So because I do have sons and have grandchildren, and when I really wanted to start writing erotica, I decided to write under a pen name. And Annie is from my middle name is Anne, and I just kind of always liked Annie. And then Moon, because when I was a child, and I grew up in an old colonial 3-story house, and when I wanted to feel, the only place I felt safe was in the attic. The stairs were very, very steep and narrow. So I knew that my father coming up or someone coming up after me, um, they kind of hesitated. They didn't really come up, and I stayed alone. And I would look out the fanlight window into the night and see the moon and really write my first poetry. And the poems I wrote back then were looking at the planets and the moon and just, trying to figure out how do I get through my life right now as a child and being here. So Annie Moon does have a lot of meaning for me, a lot of meaning. It's interesting because even in my writing, so I started writing full time just three years ago, and when I decided to write erotica and BDSM kink, I started, and you could see even in my books, in my very first book in my series, Late in Love, and the title says a lot because it does talk about someone coming out later and finding love later, but you could see even in my books how my journey has evolved, so that I've become more open, even in my writing, and how the characters handle each other. And because of my gender studies, my writing is always informed by a lot of my studies. So even in the erotica, it's not just porn. It's certainly sexual, um, you know, fetish, but there's always a message, right? There's always a message that when you read it, I would like people to have an aha moment where they're learning something. So, yeah.
That's amazing. And, I love that you write about erotica, and I've had another author on, and her pen name is Renee Moon. So, you have that connection with the moon, and I wonder, I need to ask her, about why she chose Moon as her last name, because you have a very specific story about that, and I love that. Please consider supporting the show. Are you in menopause, perimenopause, or postmenopause? I have found the absolute best products called Parlor Games. I use the estriol and progesterone topical creams, and they have been game changers. Maybe you've listened to the show and want to be featured as a guest. Eve uses Podmatch to connect with new or potential guests. Reach out and begin the process today. I know that you're well established in the kink community, and I know we talked a lot about labels and how we hate them, right? And they put us into this box, and really in sexuality, there is no box. It's just open. If you can just expand your mind and be creative, you can really explore in a lot of different ways. But you do talk about, and we did talk about, you being a pain slut. Right. And I would love for you to define that for us, and so that we could understand what that means to you specifically.
Okay. So actually my logo is under author Annie Moon is the erotic writings. And you're finding the balance between the pleasure and pain. So when I was young, and I don't know if this has anything to do with it or not, because some people would feel that when you are after pain, you're doing it for very negative reasons, right? You're doing it because mentally you're not, you just want to purge yourself, right? So there's people sometimes have body modification because of it, or they'll hurt themselves. And it's not like that when it actually comes from a very healthy place, a fetish. Now, for me, there's kind of two differences. I have a very good friend who's actually a masochist. So a masochist is a person who really just wants to be hurt, wants the pain. So the sadomasochism is one piece of it. I don't come from that kind of school of pain. Mine is in It's called, when I was in a DS relationship, a dominant submissive relationship, as a submissive, and if the pain actually settles me, grounds me, and I find a lot of pleasure in it. And if you're in a very committed, but for me, I prefer being in a committed relationship. And then there's not all the times, but a lot of times the sexual activity, right? That comes with that. There's, you'll have sex after because you get into such a state of mind in the pain that is called subspace, where you're actually kind of lose yourself and you're floating and you're just safe. But so for me, the pain is not just, the pain causes a very positive, ethereal feeling inside me. I know I'm loved. I know I'm taken care of. I know that the world out there is not touching me right at this minute. No matter what is happening, the world is not touching me. So there is a balance. Now, and I'm talking a lot of pain. I mean, I like to be caned. I like to be flogged. So it's not just spankings. It's there's things called needle play and nipple play, and I could go on a list of things of where the pain is like,
Mm-hmm.
and with that, I also like to be humiliated. But again, it's humiliation that comes from a place of, I'm a submissive who wants to be a subservient to my dominant. And humiliation for me is a way of offering me to the person that I love or that I'm in a relationship with. So when it comes to pain, that could be, that really is a whole other whole long discussion, because I said it depends on how you identify. Are you a submissive? Are you a dominant? Are you a masochist? A lot of other things come into play. So again, it's not a very strident, strict identity, actually.
Yes.
But
Mm-hmm.
but for me, it brings a lot of it brings joy. It'll bring me closer to the person I'm with. I won't have pain. I won't do scenes, is what they're called. I won't do them just with anybody.
Mm-hmm.
There has to be an intimate connection. There has to be something that's really, I'm connected with the person.
Yes. And, there is a really fine line between pain and pleasure, in my opinion, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
pain can be pleasurable if you open your mind to it. And, everybody has their own degree of what they would enjoy or not enjoy. Some people are absolutely no pain whatsoever, and then you have the other end of the spectrum where you, like you said, you like to be caned, and there's like all sorts of things. I mean, the needles and all of that, which is probably beyond me, but I definitely love a little pain with my pleasure for sure. So I can completely relate to that. And there's nothing that brings you faster to the present moment that than a good like spank at the right
Yes.
moment, or
Yes.
or something like that brings you right into the moment, and now you're completely present and you're with the person that you're with, and you can experience fully the sensations that you're feeling.
Right. It's very arousing to me. It really is very, very arousing. I mean, I just crave sex. If I do craze, if I'm in a good pain session with someone, I want the sex next. I want that next. And then the aftercare, right? And then you always want to have someone who's going to do what they call aftercare afterward. Who's going to embrace you and cuddle you and give you you usually need a lot of water after that, and, let you come down from subspace, very gently and again, safe, right? So of course, and I do want to mention, I feel obligated to say this, but everything has to be, of course, with safe and consensual consent. That is the most important things. I mean, in all of my books, and the forward, there's always a reminder that anything that I write about, even when I write about, is, it's always consented, right? Consensual consent and safe. That's especially when you get into some fetishes like the choking or the needles or even bondage. You really want to know that you could trust the person that, and using safe words, that if you need a scene to be stopped, trust that person is going to stop that scene immediately.
And I think that the kink community does communication so much better than regular relationships, right? Because you are having all of these very specific, detailed conversations about what you want to do, what you will not do. You have safe words that would help you to end the scene right at the moment if you aren't feeling comfortable. It's enthusiastic consent from both parties. And that is so key with any sexual experience, whether it be vanilla or lots of other flavors.
No, no, you're right, and it really is, your limits, right? What you're willing to do, and in like a scene, it's like you said, you will know exactly what's going to happen. It's there's nothing there, I mean, there's a surprise sometimes in that, how you react, but yeah, when you're talking about these things, and I do agree that I think vanilla relationships a lot of times might be very beneficial to have more conversations about it.
Yes, because you just assume, right, in a vanilla relationship that your partner knows exactly what to do to turn you on and to pleasure you. How would you assume that? Nobody can read your mind, you know?
Right.
So you
Exactly.
must have these conversations. It is key to any relationship, whether it be kink or vanilla and everything in between, right? And so if we're not having these conversations, it's going to be much harder to get our needs met. So I applaud the kink community for doing such a good job about having these conversations and always asking for consent. And it's not just once, but it's throughout the whole entire scene. You're constantly asking for consent,
Right.
constantly making sure that the person is okay with what's going on and moving forward.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
I know that you talked about you had gotten some bad news and the first thing that you wanted to do was go into subspace, right, in order to cope. And I love the idea of using our sex lives as a coping mechanism. Can you kind of jump into that a little bit?
Oh yeah, yes. So I had gotten, because I have glaucoma, and well, thankfully, I don't have to have surgeries.
Oh,
We're going to
okay.
try something. We're going to try something else. But anyway, but yes, and I'm not in a relationship now, and I was upset when the doctor said I had to have this major surgery on both eyes, and yes, I was distraught. And my personality is I tend to start thinking about too many things. I get a little bit, lost. It's probably why I love Wright, because I can tend to daydream so fast, but I think of all different scenarios. And all I wanted, literally, Eve, I was driving home. It wasn't even, I was just about out the doors of the office, and I was driving home and thinking, oh my goodness, what I wouldn't give to be with a Dom right now, or a Domia mistress, and have a good pain session and just have them take me out of it, and have sex and let me, like you said, float in the subspace. Let me just deal, because I find when I'm in subspace, whatever's going on in my life, even though I'm not actively thinking about it, it seems to settle it. So it grounds me. I can't tell you how it grounds me so much, so much. Yeah, again, I just want to add here, for the people who may not have done this and are think that they're over the age or not, I want you to remember, like, at my age, at 74, this was like the first thing that I thought of, was to pleasure myself, find someone who can give me the pleasure I need, and the way to that cared about me, and the way to kind of think this through. And then after the pain, after that, then we'll sit down, and the person will say, it's going to be all right, Karen. Everything's going to be all right, and it does. But it was the very first thing I thought about, as a way to just, get myself over, just, so I could, take time to settle in.
To process it and all of that. Yeah, absolutely. And I had another guest on the show named Edward Miskey, and he talks about having cancer and dealing with going through chemotherapy and radiation and all of that. And he used sex to cope as well, to get through that time, because in an experience when you have cancer where you feel very much out of control, and you're going to this appointment and going to that appointment and constantly being probed and this and that, and you really are at the hands of the medical community, and it's very disconcerting. And he felt that sex was something that he could control, and so he used it as a coping mechanism. And I can totally see how it can be used in so many different ways. So I appreciate that you shared that, because people think of sex in a lot of different ways, but often not in ways that I think that could help us to cope. And it is really good for stress relief, helps stress with sleep, and all of those endorphins released in your body after you've had a great session, right? I mean, it helps you to feel happy in your life, and it brings you joy. So I like to just put that out there. We talked about some of the heroines in your books, and you talked about having a couple of different books, one of which had a very young heroine and another that had an older heroine. And you found a difference in the sales of those books. And I want to just talk a little bit about ageism here.
Oh, thank you. And ageism is, I get it. And I think, I think I mentioned to you, I have a 6-month-old puppy that I got. And, the first thing that my family said to me, or, was why, like my son said, my mom, like, you're 74, like, what are you thinking? And I'm thinking again, I live alone. I love having the dogs, their company. They bring me joy, especially this little puppy. He stole my heart. So, but, ageism is, I was pushed out of my full-time position. I was a director of education at a nonprofit, and I got kind of pushed out because of the age. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because I began writing full time. But as you mentioned, whenever I write with an older person, and in Late in Love, which is the first book of my series, the woman is 69 years old, and a much younger woman falls for her. And she, wears a strap on. She dresses butch. She's active. She runs her own business. If I didn't say that she was 69 years old and you read the story, and I do purposely, I want people to know that writing about age, because this is what I want to bring out, right? That this person is active. I want you to know she's 69 years old. And I want you to know that there's a younger woman who's really attracted to her. And I want you to know that she runs a successful business. But yes, it doesn't matter. Their sales, the book would have had much different sales, I think, had the people not known how at the age. And the book cover is actually a very sexy. The designer did the book cover because in the book the gals got tattoos, and so the book cover, the gals got tattoos, and she's sexy and maybe what I would have looked like more like 30 years ago. So she's a little bit younger, but which I thought would have helped. But I think it makes a difference. People don't have a really understanding. There's a real myth about older, and there's so many like older actresses that are still, Meryl Streep, and I just saw Jane Seymour in a movie last night, and just, so many older actresses, but it's still not totally understood. Ageism is just a real big factor in life. And in all different kinds of, on all different levels, it hits me in the face in the most unexpected moments sometimes. But yes, with the writing, and when I write about younger, or especially in the gay, like I write both uh, lesbian and gay. I write kind of all across the rainbow, but the older and the younger, and there's certain tropes, right? That the dominant has to be older, and the the submissive has to be younger, and the submissive got to be beautiful, and the dominant's got to, there's certain tropes that people expect, and I'm little by little just trying to kind of break the mold of that.
I agree, because it doesn't matter how old you are. If you like being a submissive, you're going to be a submissive. If you like to be a dominant, you're going to be a dominant. Doesn't matter how old you are,
No, and if you are a strap on or not, you just matter fault. If it makes you feel good, it, it does. I came across a poem just in kind of getting ready for the show, and then I was actually looking for something, and I came across a poem that I wrote, like literally, I must have had it write it 30 years ago, if not longer, and it's called "The Folly of a God Not Looking." And I didn't realize that back when I was much younger, like in my 20s, at that time, I was talking about the lack I felt because I didn't have a penis. I mean, and it was a poem about wanting to be, like, so the androgynous in me, right? And it was a poem about wanting to be, and about how they have a better language, right, over women who don't necessarily aren't heard. And it just struck me, because then it's like, wow, and I'm sorry, I digress there, but it just kind of hit me that sometimes, and I guess the message what I'd like to tell to all the listeners who are listening is that, kind of pay attention to those little things that happened even when you're younger and years ago, that maybe you didn't explore then, but that you'd like to kind of go back to now and explore.
And I would love to explore more about this and more about strap-ons and about how, certain parts of the lesbian communities wear them more than others, and I didn't actually even know that. I just thought that, some people like strap-on, some people don't, and it doesn't matter who you are or whatever. I would love to delve into that, but I think that's going to be for another podcast, because we are running out of time. And I did want to say something about this, because ageism is such a problem, and we discount women specifically even more so as they get older. And, we discount their opinions, their experiences, and even expect that they don't deserve or need pleasure anymore, and honestly, when you look at the STI statistics, right? Sexually transmitted infections, more than doubled in the last 10 years in the 65 plus community. So that shows that, one, we need more education about STI prevention in the community, but two, that everyone is having sex, even at, 65 plus, and so, we shouldn't discount that just because somebody is older that they're suddenly not interested in sex anymore. Give me a break. Like, we all deserve love and pleasure.
Right. Exactly.
Last week, Eve interviewed Barb Nangle, a boundaries coach who talked about how 12-step recovery changed her life and improved her ability to communicate, which led to the most incredible sex life of her entire life. It is definitely a must listen.
So I am going to just wrap things up here, because I think we can have a whole nother podcast about all of the other notes that I have in front of me that I want to ask you about, because I have so many questions for you. But I just want to first ask you my very last question that I ask all of my guests. It is, what tools do you bring into the bedroom to make things spicier? And it doesn't have to be a physical object. It can be anything.
I would say my arousal. I get, for anyone who's my age, you want to be taking hormones unless you can't. And I get aroused as much now as I do when I was like in my 20s and 30s. But I would say, I think just the mentality, and I'm sorry if I'm not being more specific, but it kind of caught me. But I do think I bring the energy, I bring the arousal, I bring the desire. That I think is probably the most important in any toy. And I do use toys too, but that to me is more, it's what's in the imagination and
your mindset, basically. You have to bring the right mindset. And I think that that's key. And, I've had this conversation before where, if you're not mentally prepared for the moment, no matter what you do, you're not going to get there because your mind is off thinking about something completely different, So you have to be present and you have to have the right mindset to be ready to receive pleasure and to experience pleasure.
Right.
So I completely agree. Well, I want to make sure that all of my listeners can find you. So tell us where we can find you.
All right. So I am on author Annie Moon. And please, don't forget the author, because there's an Annie Moon out there, but she's a children's book writer. Definitely not me. And then also I'm on Instagram and Facebook. And then I do have a website under my name, Karen Anne Coccioli. And that is not the more erotica. If you're into erotica and you want to read about some fun fetishes, then please. And yes, for anyone out there who is my age, please go out and buy Latent Love. It's the very first book of a 4-book series. So I think you'll enjoy it.
Wonderful. Yes, everyone go out there and buy that book. It sounds very enticing. And I just want to make sure that my listeners can find me as well on pleaseme.online. As a licensed physical therapist, I treat conditions of the pelvic floor and sexual health. I treat conditions such as erectile dysfunction, decreased vaginal sensitivity and dryness, incontinence, and painful sex, and a host of other sexual health conditions. So if you find that that's you and you're listening, please don't hesitate to reach out and say hello. I'm here to help. And there is no shame in having a sexual health condition. And a lot of times people will wait too long before they seek help because of the shame and stigma. And I just want to say that you are not alone and that, there is help for you if you are experiencing anything like that. So with that being said, I want to make sure that my listeners can also call me, and you can call me on the OWL app, and you can use the code EH576472, and we can speak directly on the app. And if you're interested in more modern, quote unquote, relationships and you want to explore that a little bit more, you can go onto STC.com, which is a worldwide community of people who are kinksters and swingers and, polyamorous and open relationships. And this will give you a free trial session. So be sure to check that out if that's something that you're interested in. And please support the show on pleaseme.online. With that being said, I want to thank you again for being on the show today, Karen. And thanks for being here today on Please Me.
Oh, thank you so much.
Until next time.
Visit pleaseme.online to reach Eve or for more information on products to increase blood flow and overall health, for her curated list of her favorite toys, and for swag that shows that you are a big fan. Please consider supporting the show.
Looking for the best live streaming or podcast recording site? Look no further than StreamYard. Get $10 off your first purchase. For podcast hosting, Buzzsprout is the absolute best option out there. Get $20 off your first purchase. Have any questions? Feel free to call me on the OWL app. Use code EH576472 for $10 free to use on the best networking app around. Give me a call. If you're experiencing sexual issues and need a physical therapy consultation or appointment, reach out to Eve and make an appointment on pleaseme.online.